He thinks he's talking to himself. He has no clue that every animal staring back at him is actually following the plot, arguing over suspects, and picking the killer before he even turns the page. He definitely has no clue that one day, that same flock will be the only ones capable of solving his murder. That's the wild premise we're diving into today. And trust me, by the end of this breakdown, you'll understand why this might be one of the most unexpectedly gripping mystery films to come out in years. At the beginning of the movie, we are introduced to George Hardy, a weathered shepherd who lives a quiet, isolated life in a caravan on the edge of a small town called Denbrook. He's not just a man who raises sheep, he's a man who names them, talks to them, treats every single one like family. And out of his entire flock, two stand out immediately. There's Sebastian, an enormous ram with a wandering streak, the kind of animal that answers to nobody. And then there's Lily, sharp, quick-witted, the undisputed brains of the group. Every night while George reads his mystery novels aloud, convinced his sheep are just zoning out, the flock is secretly dissecting the story like a book club, tossing around theories about the killer. And 9 times out of 10, it's Lily who calls it correctly, usually chapters before the big reveal even happens. We're also introduced early on to a lamb that doesn't have a name. Every other lamb on this farm was born in spring. This one arrived in the dead of winter, and for reasons the flock can't fully articulate, they treat it like an outsider. Not bullied exactly, just invisible. George notices something the sheep don't expect him to notice. He starts giving this forgotten little lamb extra attention, and the flock draws its own bizarre conclusion from that. Maybe George isn't a sheep at all. Why else would he bother with the one lamb nobody else wants? From here, the story pulls back to show us Denbrook itself, and this is where the human drama really starts brewing. There's Caleb, a neighboring shepherd who leases land right next to George's farm. There's Hem, the town butcher. There's Beth, who runs the local inn and clearly has history with George. And there's Reverend Hillcoat, whose relationship with George feels tense the second they share a scene. Like there's an old wound between them that's never fully healed. Then something strange happens. George walks into the middle of a Sunday church service, drops a thick wad of cash onto the offering plate in front of the entire congregation, and walks straight back out without a single word of explanation. It's the kind of moment that plants a question in your head and refuses to let go. Around that same time, we learn George has written a letter. We don't know who it's going to yet, or what it says, only that it clearly matters to him enough to send it. The next day, Caleb pulls up to the farm, and the sheep absolutely lose it with excitement, tails wagging, practically giddy, to the point where 2 of the more reckless sheep start hatching a plan to ram his truck, purely out of affection, before Lily shuts the idea down. The flock even starts daydreaming about merging with Caleb's herd into one big happy family. And then, out of nowhere, George shoves Caleb out of the caravan. Whatever happened inside that trailer, we don't get to see it. Neither do the sheep. And this is where the film drops one of its most clever ideas. This flock can forget things on purpose, all at once, like flipping a switch. Every sheep can do it, except one. A sheep named Maple remembers everything, whether he wants to or not. So the moment things turn sour with Caleb, the flock simply counts down and erases the memory together, except Maple. Maple is stuck holding on to something nobody else wants to carry. Meanwhile, a struggling journalist named Elliot Matthew rolls into Denbrook expecting to cover the town's big cultural festival, only to discover its 3 folding tables set up in an empty field. This is a man who spent years chasing a real story and keeps getting handed nothing. At the post office, Beth catches sight of the letter George sent, addressed to a woman named Rebecca Hampstead, written on rose-scented paper, and she jumps to the obvious conclusion. It must be a love letter meant for her. She quietly pulls it out of the mailbag before it can ever be delivered. That night, a storm rolls through Denbrook, loud enough to send the lambs into a panic. One of the older sheep calms them down with a story the whole flock genuinely believes, that sheep never really die, they simply become clouds, and that's why it rains, because the clouds are old friends watering the grass to say thank you. It's a beautiful little myth. Maple, the one who forgets nothing, knows it isn't true. He stays quiet anyway. Some lies are kinder left alone. While the storm rages outside, the film starts cutting between several things happening at once, and every single one of them matters. Reverend Hillcoat locks a stack of money in a safe. Hem sharpens his butcher knives. Beth reads George's letter, and it fills her with an anger we don't understand yet. And out on the road, Elliot's car slams into a tree. As he waits for a tow truck, he catches sight of a flashlight flickering somewhere out in George's field. Then someone knocks on George's door. By morning, the flock wanders outside to find George lying completely still on the ground. At first, Lily thinks it's some kind of game. It's Maple, who checks for a heartbeat and realizes there isn't one. This is the exact moment the film stops being charming and becomes genuinely heartbreaking, because Lily has never experienced real death before, only the version she's heard about in George's bedtime mystery novels. She asks if he's going to become a cloud now. She's told no. Only sheep get that. And true to form, the flock's first instinct is to agree to forget the whole thing ever happened. That's when Sebastian finally puts his foot down. He refuses to let them erase George. He tells them flatly that a real friend doesn't just get deleted from memory because remembering is painful. And in that same breath, he reveals something the flock has never once questioned: that sheep aren't kept around purely for company, they're raised for wool, and sometimes for something much worse. It's a devastating scene, mostly because not a single sheep in that field had ever thought to ask what happens to them once they stop being useful. It's actually one of the lambs who asks the question that changes everything. In every single mystery story George ever read them, the person who dies is always murdered. So why would this be any different? That one question flips a switch in Lily's brain. The police arrive not long after. Caleb is the one who discovered the body. Him shows up too and immediately starts doing something oddly specific, counting the sheep, like he's already calculating their worth instead of grieving George's death. Lily, meanwhile, is quietly running her own investigation. Why would George have gone outside in a storm without his coat or hat? And why are there 2 used drinking glasses sitting in the caravan when George lived completely alone? Enter Elliot, chasing his story, snapping photos at the scene, while the local officer, a well-meaning but clearly out-of-his-depth cop named Tim, insists this is nothing more than a heart attack. Nothing here for a journalist to dig into. Except Elliot keeps circling back to details Tim conveniently missed, like why a dying man would stagger outside into a storm, and those 2 mismatched glasses. Tim had searched around the caravan already. It never occurred to him to check inside. Not until Elliot pushed him to. Back at the farm, Lily lays out her theory to the flock, like she's narrating one of George's own detective novels. No visible wounds probably rules out straightforward violence. More likely poison. That torn-up patch of ground outside points to a struggle. Whoever visited that night was someone George trusted enough to share a drink with. And since the only investigator on the case can't even locate the second glass on his own, it's up to the sheep to crack this thing themselves. Sebastian isn't buying it. He laughs the whole idea off. They're sheep. Smart, sure, especially Lily. But sheep who have never once left this farm. What good is book smarts against a world she's never actually stepped foot in? It's a fair point, and the film doesn't let Lily brush past it easily. When she and Maple finally reach the edge of the road for the first time, they both freeze completely. It's honestly one of the most oddly relatable scenes in the whole movie. 2 brilliant minds paralyzed by nothing more than a strip of tarmac. It takes watching a random chicken casually stroll across without a second thought before they finally work up the nerve to follow. Meanwhile, in town, Officer Tim slips up and lets it out that he can't comment on the poisoning, which of course confirms exactly what everyone suspected. Word spreads fast. Taxine, extracted from yew berries, and wouldn't you know it, there's a yew tree right on the edge of George's property. That's the exact moment a car pulls up and a young woman steps out. Tim is instantly smitten. Right behind her comes George's lawyer, Lydia. The woman is Rebecca Hampstead, George's daughter, the very same person that mysterious letter was addressed to. Lydia had already been trying to track Rebecca down using contact details listed in George's will, except Tim, the man who actually made the call, never bothered reading the will himself. Lydia announces there will be a formal reading that afternoon, and everyone named needs to show up. Hillcoat, Caleb, Beth, Hem, Rebecca, and Tim. Here's where things get genuinely suspicious. Rebecca lives in America, and somehow she's standing in Denbrook on the exact day her father turns up dead. When Tim asks whether she just landed that morning or was already in the country the night George was killed, she insists she only arrived the evening before and has never once set foot in Denbrook. But watching quietly from a distance, the sheep notice something Tim completely misses. Rebecca is smiling, but her eyes are full of fear. Inside during the reading, we learn Rebecca has a twin brother she's never met, currently living somewhere in South Africa. Lydia throws Elliot out the second he tries weaseling his way into the room, then drops the real bombshell. George also requested his son Peter be present. And then comes the twist nobody sees coming. George had sent Lydia a version of his will 2 months earlier. But the one she's reading today is brand new, dated only 3 days before his death, discovered sitting right there on his own kitchen table. In it, George writes that he has unfinished business with every single person in that room. He describes a fool, a bad shepherd, a spring lamb, a winter lamb, a victim, and 2 murderers, all of them supposedly sitting there listening to him read it from beyond the grave. It's a chilling line to put in a legal document, and the room immediately erupts into chaos, everyone pointing fingers at everyone else. Peter is left 300 acres, land currently leased out to Caleb. Rebecca gets the other 300 acres, which includes the farm itself, the caravan, the barn, and every single sheep. On top of that, she inherits everything else George owned, a few bags of fertilizer, and $30 million. It turns out George once invented a treatment for a sheep disease and sold the patent to a massive agricultural company for that exact sum. While that scene unfolds, chaos breaks loose over at the inn thanks to Maple, who gets his head stuck trying to snag a carrot through a window, panics, and comes crashing blindly through furniture until Tim finally catches him and spots the missing letter sitting right there in Beth's belongings. The sheep get shooed back outside, but the seed is planted. Beth is hiding something. Caleb comments that the flock could really use a proper shepherd, especially that massive, wild ram George dragged home from who knows where. And speaking of Sebastian, we finally get his backstory, and it's brutal. He was once a carnival attraction, gentle and sweet during the day for paying kids, then thrown into vicious nighttime fights against dogs once he got too big to be considered cute. George found him, paid whatever it cost, and brought him home. When Lily asks how he ended up somewhere so cruel, separated from any flock of his own, Sebastian's answer lands like a punch. He's a winter lamb too. And sooner or later, every winter lamb wants out. Outside the inn, Elliot corners Tim and basically proposes a partnership. Tim needs an arrest, Elliot needs a headline, so why not team up? He mentions the flashlight he saw the night his car crashed, right around 9 p.m., near George's field. The coroner had already placed the time of death somewhere between 8 and 11. The pieces are starting to line up. To his credit, Tim actually builds a proper suspect board, mapping out means, motive, and opportunity for everyone connected to George. The U-tree gives nearly the entire town means, but the motive narrows down hard to one person, Rebecca, sole heir to $30 million. He starts questioning everyone one by one. Hem insists the killer has to be someone named in the will, since George never touched meat in his life. Beth claims the missing letter was just a postal mix-up. Caleb admits he came by that morning because his lease had just been canceled, and he wanted George to reconsider. Hillcoat finally explains that donation from earlier. Years ago, the church quietly arranged for George's children to be given up for adoption, and once George rebuilt his life, he spent years trying to track them down. The church wouldn't release the records, so Hillcoat offered to help, for a price. Then Tim turns his questioning on Rebecca, and this is where things get genuinely damning. Her alibi is that she was at an airport hotel, watching TV. Tim reveals he's already run a background check, and her real name isn't Rebecca Hamstead at all. It's Chastity Cramps. She once shared a bank account with a known criminal. She insists that was years ago, and she had no idea what he was mixed up in. When Tim asks if she's ever been anywhere near the U-tree, or George's farm at all, she flatly denies both. Out in the field, the sheep are having their own heated debate. Most of them are already convinced Rebecca is guilty, until the winter lamb speaks up. It caught George's ghost wandering the property the night of the murder, and even though the dark made it hard to see, it smelled unmistakably like George. That detail nags at Lily. Another sheep named Cloud mentioned something eerily similar the day before, claiming she smelled Rebecca from across the entire field, which shouldn't be possible unless Rebecca had been there more than once. When pushed, Cloud finally admits what she's been hiding. A bangle, one Rebecca lost while petting her, slipped off her wrist during a visit that supposedly never happened, on the exact night George died. That's enough for Lily. Rebecca lied to the police. She was there, twice. Sebastian refuses to accept it, arguing the flock only turned on her because she was born in winter, just like him, just like the lamb everyone shuns. He looked her in the eyes and didn't see a killer, but the evidence keeps piling up. Maple steals Tim's hat and leads him straight to the bangle out in the meadow. Tim matches it to the one still on Rebecca's other wrist and confronts her. She'd sworn she never set foot on that land, and here's physical proof she had. A search warrant turns up yew berries hidden under one of her shoes. Tim arrests her on the spot. At the station, Rebecca finally admits to part of the truth. Yes, she was on the property. George had written to her, explaining he'd spent 2 decades searching for the children the church had taken from him. He'd sent her an earlier version of the will, one with no mention of money at all, because he genuinely just wanted her to come meet him, to know she'd have a home taking care of his sheep. She says everything she told the police afterward was a panicked lie, because the truth would only make her look guiltier. Tim isn't buying a word of it. Rebecca is scheduled to be formally charged and shipped off to county court the next morning. That's when Lydia drops another bombshell on Tim. If Rebecca is convicted, Peter inherits everything by default, and Peter has already agreed to sell the entire farm, sheep and all, straight to Caleb. The paperwork is set to be finalized the very next day. Lily overhears the whole conversation, and something about it just doesn't sit right with her. Curious about their future owner, Lily and Maple sneak across the fence to scope out Caleb's side, only to get chased off by his guard dogs and end up lost inside his barn. What they find there stops them cold. Stacks of boxes labeled with a meat processing company, proof that Caleb and him have secretly been running a slaughter operation together the entire time. Before they can process what they're looking at, the dogs catch up to them again, and this time it isn't just intimidation. Sebastian bursts in to save them, fighting the dogs off with everything he has left and managing to scare them away. But the fight costs him everything. He can't get back up. Lily doesn't understand what's happening until Maple tells her plainly, Sebastian is dying. And in his final moments, staring off at something none of them can see, Sebastian looks like he's found George waiting for him. It's in this exact moment that Lily finally realizes the whole story about sheep becoming clouds was never true. It was just something the flock told each other, so grief would hurt a little less. With Caleb closing in fast, Maple drags Lily back to warn the rest of the flock. Leave tonight, or none of them survive what's coming. Because Caleb turns sheep into product, not pets. But the moment they reach the road again, the flock simply stops. Lily tells them Sebastian is gone. They refuse to hear it. Together, they choose to forget the warning entirely and drift right back to grazing like nothing happened. Shaken, Lily asks Maple something that's clearly been eating at her. Was tonight really the first time she'd ever watched a sheep die? Maple finally admits the truth. He remembers every terrible thing that's happened to this flock, but he also holds on to the good. His mother's face, old friends long gone, and now he'll carry Sebastian too. It hurts, he tells her, but forgetting means losing the ability to protect anyone at all. Memory is the only thing that keeps the ones you've lost anywhere close to alive. Right as Lily is about to give up and let herself forget too, George appears in front of her, because she never let herself forget him in the first place. He tells her Caleb will never get his hands on this flock, because she's the one who's going to stop it. If she can prove who actually killed him, Rebecca inherits everything, and the flock stays safe. The only problem is, Lily has no idea where to even begin. Then, it hits her. That stain on George's hand the night he died, it was never grass. The winter lamb, the one who's never forgotten a single detail, steps in to help. Lily dips one of its legs in yellow paint and the other in blue, then walks it straight to the police station, guiding its steps to trace a path back toward George. Rebecca watches the bizarre little performance unfold in confusion. The next morning, Tim finds 2 painted lines meeting at a single point. Rebecca on one side, and on the other, a smear of green sitting right in the middle of yellow. He can't make sense of it at first, and when he tries wiping the paint off his hand, the yellow and blue mix together right in front of his eyes and turn green. More officers show up to escort Rebecca to court. Tim hands over the paperwork, and then his eyes drift back to the winter lamb's paint-streaked legs one more time. Suddenly it clicks. He stops the transfer cold. So who actually killed George Hardy? From the moment Rebecca stepped foot in Denbrook, she was the obvious suspect, mostly because she lied about being on the property, which is exactly what the real killer was counting on. The real killer is Peter. Just like Rebecca, he received a copy of the will, and it's safe to assume he learned about the $30 million the exact same way. But there's a fatal flaw in murdering a rich relative who leaves everything to you directly. You become suspect number 1. Frame your sibling instead, and the money quietly reverts back to you the moment she's convicted. And Peter had already changed his name. He's Elliot Matthews, the very journalist the winter lamb caught wandering the property that night. Mistaken for George's ghost because he carried his father's exact scent. Elliot had actually been living in the country for a while already. Once George mentioned Rebecca's upcoming visit, the timing lined up perfectly. He used a fake festival assignment as cover, staged a visible exit from town, then let a conveniently timed car accident bring him right back in. That night, once Rebecca had already left, he went to see George himself, poisoned his drink, and planted the newer version of the will. George fought back harder than expected. There was a struggle, and George didn't survive it. It was Elliot who slipped away from the will, reading under the excuse of a phone call. It was Elliot who planted the yew berries in Rebecca's shoes. And it was Elliot who left behind one careless piece of evidence, a two-tone smudge on George's hand. The blue came from medicine George handled regularly. The green came from that blue mixing with yellow. And the yellow came straight from Elliot's own hair, cheaply and hastily dyed so he wouldn't resemble his father or sister, dye that transferred onto George's fingers during the struggle, and again, onto the pillowcase Elliot slept on that same night. Elliot laughs it all off, insisting the dye job was just a bad decision, nothing more. But Tim isn't collecting his hair to check the color. He's sending it off for a DNA test, to prove once and for all that Elliot really is George Hardy's son. The instant Elliot realizes what that means, he bolts for his car. Lily, watching everything unfold, sends the two most destructive sheep in the flock, the same two who'd been dying for a reason to ram something, straight into Elliot's car, stopping him dead in his tracks. He's arrested on the spot. Tim apologizes to Rebecca. The winter lamb comes to check on her too. And Tim shoots Lily a look that says he understands, somehow, exactly who really cracked this case. Before everyone heads back to the farm, Beth finally hands Rebecca the letter she'd been holding on to. The one she was convinced all along was a love letter meant for herself. Turns out Beth had loved George once, but after Rebecca's mother, he never let himself love anyone else again. Rebecca admits she doesn't even know her own mother's name. Beth tells her it was Lily. Hem and Caleb try one last time to buy the farm and the entire flock. Rebecca refuses without a second thought. These are two men who spent the whole film plotting to turn her father's sheep into inventory, and neither of them ever bothered learning a single one of their names. Rebecca knows every name. Instead, she buys Caleb's entire flock outright, changes her name from Rebecca Hampstead to Rebecca Hardy, and moves into the farm permanently. She sits with the sheep every evening now, just like her father used to, reading them stories aloud, and meets a sheep named Lily, named, she realizes, after her own mother. In the film's final moment, Lily walks over to the winter lamb, the one nobody wanted, the one who never forgot a single detail, the one who ended up cracking the entire case wide open, and she finally gives it a name, George. And this time, the whole flock accepts it without a single moment of hesitation. So, what did you actually think of a murder mystery cracked wide open by a flock of talking sheep who can erase their own memories on command, and somehow out-detective the actual police officer assigned to the case? It's a strange, unexpected little film, but it earns every twist it throws at you, and Sebastian's arc alone is enough to leave you a little wrecked if you weren't ready for it. And look, if you made it all the way to this point in the video, you already know exactly what's coming. Channels like this one only survive because people like you actually stick around and hit that subscribe button. And if this breakdown kept you hooked and you still haven't subscribed, this is genuinely the moment to do it. Not later, not maybe next video, right now. Every single explainer we put together takes hours of research and writing, and none of it reaches anyone new unless you're actually part of the numbers backing this channel. So do it now, before you forget, because let's be honest, half this flock would have forgotten by now too. And before you go, drop a comment down below. Who did you suspect before the reveal? Rebecca, Caleb, Hillcoat? Or did you actually catch on to Elliot early? I read every single comment, and I want to know if this movie fooled you the same way it fooled me.